sometimes it's just, the way that they talk about the church up the street, you know?
Literally.
Oh,
Yeah.
those guys and the way they're doing things, you don't wanna be part of the and every other church except for ours is doing it wrong, and
Yes,
it's like,
yes, yes.
you know.
Yeah, I told Vince, you're almost better off being an atheist than being the wrong kind of evangelical Christian. You're
Right.
almost more salvageable not believing in God at all than being a Presbyterian
Yeah.
or a Methodist. Gary Parker, thank you so much
Yeah,
for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I'm so
thanks for
excited to
having me.
have you. Yeah, I've been looking forward to getting you kind of on here on the record just to talk about yourself and your story for a very long time. For anybody who's listening, maybe this is your first time tuning in, maybe you've been here before. Gary and I are part of something called the Conversation Coalition, which is a group of 4 Christians and 4 atheists here in Nashville, Tennessee, that get together the last Thursday of every month and we have conversations. And every month we pick a topic or a question, and one Christian member and one atheist member of our group gets on stage and has the conversation with a moderator that is usually another member of our group. And then we open the floor for Q&A, for live Q&A for people to attend. It's always free. We got snacks, we got all sorts of stuff. But I'm interested to learn more about Gary because we get up there and we talk about these philosophical topics, but we don't really get to talk about each other much. And
Yeah,
so, enough from me. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What are you all about?
yeah. Um, well, my name's Gary Parker. I was raised in Memphis. I was raised Southern Baptist,
Hmm.
and was fairly religious all of my young adult life. And we weren't. It wasn't like Fundie. Um, we were in church every time the doors were open, but it
Right.
wasn't. It wasn't in any way cultish or abusive or anything like that.
Right.
My upbringing was very Beaver Cleaver, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I had a great upbringing. Um, been married about 25 years. We're coming up on our
Wow.
25th anniversary this year.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, yeah, thank
That's
you.
awesome.
Um, most of that we haven't attended a lot of. We've gone back and forth to a dozen different churches, pretty much all non-denominational, looking for our church home, so to speak. And about 5 years ago, I started having some cracks start forming in my faith. Started asking a lot of questions, and then as I dug in, I kind of went down the Hitchens, Harris, Dawkins YouTube rabbit holes,
Right. As you do.
and yeah, as one does.
Mm,
And from there started getting into a lot of conversations and asking a lot of questions and basically trying to find as much information as I could on different
yeah.
things. And finally, about 3 years ago, I would say everything came crumbling down,
Right.
and I said, "Okay, I think I'm done with all this.
Yeah.
I think human beings have made all this up." And
So, what was it about that point in the timeline that's flipped the switch for you? Was it like an event, or did you meet somebody, or how does one just kind of decide decades
yeah,
into this that they have questions?
yeah. So for my day to day work, I do granite countertops.
Mm,
So I'm really into rocks. Not that I'm a geologist or anything like
yeah.
that, but we do oftentimes find cool things in rocks. Sometimes fossils, sometimes other things. So I remember a number of years ago, I was doing somebody's house, and I was walking them around looking at all this different granite and marble and different slabs for countertops, and I was showing them this one slab that has a bunch of fossils in it. It's pretty much an entire slab of fossils in our
That's
industry.
cool.
Yeah, in our industry, we just call it fossil stone, because it's just got hundreds of them in these slabs of granite or slabs of I guess it's a marble, you would say. Anyway, it's a Orthoceras is the fossil if you ever wanted to look it up. But and I was telling them that when we cut this stuff, it behaves differently than other stones in the shop. Um, we cut everything wet, and so it goes down into this slurry, kind of a sludge, and I've cut thousands and thousands of slabs, and so I'm very familiar with how that sludge normally, behaves. But when you cut this stuff, it's a little bit different because oil and water don't mix,
Mm,
and so these fossils are the overall slab is black. The reason it's black, and when you cut it, it smells like tar. It smells like somebody's asphalting outside.
interesting.
So my theory has always been, yeah, these little guys, they're almost like giant earthworms, but
Yeah.
earthworms that are like 3 or 4 feet long, and sometimes the size of your arm. And it's almost like you had a bowl of soup, froze it, a bowl of noodles, froze it, and then sliced. You would get little snippets of one, and full
Yeah.
big bodies of another one, and then little tails sticking out here and there, and you get all these little bits and pieces because you've got this slice going through there. And so I'd say, yeah, and this stuff was tar pits years and years ago, and all these guys got into the tar pits
Yeah.
with enough time and heat and pressure, and that now these are stone, like the petrified tree, or other things that become fossilized. So now we get slices of these, and when we cut them, you can smell the tar. You can, you know,
That's
um,
cool.
yeah. And so I was telling them about this, and I said, yeah. So millions of years ago, these guys swam into this area, and they looked at me and they went, millions. And I
Oh
said,
no.
yeah, millions, you know? And I didn't really think much about it, but that always stuck with me. And I thought,
Yeah.
you guys really think that the earth is only a few thousand years old? Like you don't look at that as a myth or a fairy tale or just a way that people used to think about that. You guys really believe that
Yeah.
it's a young earth. And so
Yeah.
that got me questioning. Another one of the cracks that started forming was I heard somebody say, well, got to stand with Israel. Got to stand with Israel. And I thought, it just struck me as odd.
Yeah.
And so I started digging into it. Why is it that we have this strong bond to Israel? And
Yeah.
the more I learned about it, the more I learned it's a religious thing. It's
Yeah.
purely a religious motive.
Yeah.
And so then I thought, well,
Especially Baptists. I've
especially
noticed, like, as a kid, like, we worshipped Israel. We loved Israel, and I remember as a kid thinking, "So, Jews are God's chosen people. We name our kids Jewish names. Why are we not all like, why is the rule not to become Jewish?"
right,
And
right,
nobody could ever answer that question for me. I was like, "So he favors them the most, right? Yes, they're God's chosen people. Yes. Why aren't we trying for that?" And, as I got older, I learned more about Judaism, and that's kinda not how that works, like, you can convert, but, like, it's a race and religion, there's all that, but I was never told any of that stuff, and so
yeah.
I was just walking around being like, "If we all agree that God loves them the most, wha why don't why isn't rule number 1 be more like them?" I'm confused.
Well, those are the things that I was raised and believed, and.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So, young Earth and everything else. So once all those things, and I think just learning more about rocks and things like that just caused me to become curious. So I started
Yeah.
asking around a lot, and
And did
so,
that impact at home? Because, obviously, I'm guessing you guys got married in the Baptist church as well.
oh, yeah.
And so
Well, we actually eloped. Um,
nice.
yeah, yeah. We got married one day on our lunch break. That morning,
We did too, like a week ago.
really,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we woke up that morning not knowing we were going to get married, and then by lunchtime, hey, let's go do this right now, and we did. We worked together, so
Nice.
yeah, yeah. Um, so as far as how it was at home, that was a challenge. First person I spoke to when I started really having doubts and started really feeling like, okay, I'm on a different trajectory now. First person I started having conversations with was my wife,
Yeah.
and it didn't go well. Um, she got
Interesting.
she got a little bit teary eyed and
Yeah.
left the conversation.
Yeah.
It did not feel good or pleasant in any way.
Right.
Um, Not that she's ever been tremendously religious or spiritual. If
Right.
I took the lead on that when we were heavily involved in church at times,
Right. Right.
but so I circled back around and a couple days later, and I said, "Hey, um, you seemed upset during that conversation. And she said, well, I felt very attacked and I don't want to do that. And of course, I said, hey, we don't ever have to have this conversation again
Yeah.
at all. I love you more than anything else out here. So we never have to talk about it again. My goal is not to was not to attack you and your beliefs. My goal
Right.
was to open a window into myself and let you know what was
Right.
going on with me. And if I seemed lost in thought or busy researching something for a long period, I wanted you to know what's going on with me and what trajectory I'm on. And so that was my only intent in that, was to, like I said, shed some light. Uh, my next conversation was with my sister, and it went almost identical to the conversation that I had with my wife.
Yeah, because it's like it's such a definitive thing for religious people, even people who don't think they're that religious, like they're not even, fundies or evangelicals, for their relative to say, "Hey, I'm like questioning God. I'm questioning the Bible." It's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you mean you're questioning? Like the
Yeah,
whole thing is faith. Like the whole brand is faith and you don't have it. What have I done wrong? Or what
right.
can I do to save you? Is this God challenging me?"
Yeah, yeah. And I wasn't at the time. I didn't tiptoe at all, or I didn't know to. These are people that I'm close to. We've known each other
Yeah.
our whole lives, or like a quarter of a century,
Yeah.
and so we just communicate, wide open. And I said, hey, this thing that we've been devoting our life to, I think it's all made up. And that didn't go very well.
This
And
thing
so
that is like part of what the foundation of our relationship is built upon, not sure about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that we've based our identities and not to mention all this time we've spent and money and all that.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so that conversation went about the same, and I had to circle back. So she's in a different my sister is in a different city, obviously. We're in Nashville, she's in Knoxville. And we normally speak once or twice a week, normally, I would say. We didn't speak for a couple of months. And
Wow.
yeah, so I had to
That's
circle back and
tough.
I said, hey, I feel disconnected here. What's going on? She said, well, in the last conversation we had, I felt attacked. And so I had to do the same thing and say, hey, I love you more than any of this stuff.
Yeah.
We never have to talk about it again. I just wanted to open a window. So we managed to get past that. Still did not speak about it. We carried on with our relationship, and we would just talk about everything else under the sun, but
Yeah.
never broached this subject.
Right.
Um, care for each other a lot, spend time together, holidays, camping trips, various things, but just politely did not bring this up to one another.
And it's you and
Um,
your sister or you and your wife
yeah,
or both? Yeah.
me and my sister, yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, about a year ago, so we've carried on like that for 2 years or so.
Wow.
Finally, about a year ago, maybe not even that long, maybe 8 or 9 months ago, I think it was in preparation for one of our Conversation Coalition events. I wanted to get her opinion on something. And so I said, I want to get your opinion. I will not offer mine. I simply want to take in I want to take in the information. I don't want to take in your opinion, but I'm not interested in giving mine unless you want it. I'm happy to, but
Right.
I
Right.
don't want you to think that I'm expecting a back and forth. I
Right.
just want to. She said, okay. And so I asked her the question. It was on morality or something, and she gave me her answer when she spoke for about 5-10 minutes, and I said, okay, thank you, I appreciate it. And then that was it. We moved on to something else. Well, then she circled back a couple of days later and said, hey, I gave you my opinion. I'm curious about yours. And I said, okay. And that began a back and forth. So
Interesting.
now we have back and forths,
Yeah.
occasionally, but we can at least talk about it now and know that neither one of us is being attacked.
Right.
And so that's been big. Um,
Interesting.
yeah. So yeah,
How have
yeah, there's been some challenging conversations.
And so is your wife more like, do you guys have these conversations more often? Do you kind of leave him at the door? How does that go?
Yeah. It's at first it was a very slow process, um, we would occasionally have conversations about it.
Mm,
Then she would research some apart from me,
yeah.
and we would end up talking about some stuff later. Now we just have an open conversation about it whenever we see something, or
Right.
anything like that.
Right.
And sometimes she brings it up. In the past year or so, and I don't know what caused it, but in the past year or so, we've started a new habit, which is in the morning we spend about 45 minutes together, just one on one, and
That's cool.
we intentionally try to find deep water to go in,
Yeah.
and
That's
so
cool.
whatever big topics are going on in the day, say it's the trans discussion, or Roe versus Wade, anything that's big
Yeah.
in the news like that, um, we'll intentionally say, "Hey, what's your opinion on this? Why do people think that way? How would I feel if I was in this situation? Do you think it's right for?" And so we just intentionally have about 45 minutes every morning, and
That's
um,
cool.
yeah, yeah,
That's really
and
cool.
and I've enjoyed it so much. I mean, I really look forward to them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, because
That's awesome.
the rest of the day, I'm just doing my thing, and
Yeah.
installing Granite, and I'm on job sites, and so I don't, and I've been doing it for a long, long time. So it's not like I'm regularly challenged throughout my
Right.
day, and so I
Right.
look for this intellectual stimulation just to start my morning off, and
Yeah.
give something to rattle around in there. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll be um, not able to find my footing on a certain topic, or uh, just not really able to put it into words, and she
Yeah.
will sum it up and make it and I'm like, that's exactly
That
what I was thinking, but I
that's what
couldn't.
I was gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
it's been
neat.
it's been awesome. So
That's great. That's great.
yeah.
And how at what point did you decide that you're like, I'm gonna use the A word? I think that I don't believe in God. Are you atheist, agnostic? How do you consider yourself if you had to put a label on it?
Definitely atheist,
Mm,
and I border on anti-theist. Um,
interesting.
yeah,
Oh,
I have a bit of a, I don't want to be the angry atheist kind of thing,
right.
but I won't go so far as to say I just passively am not convinced.
Right.
I, I'm, I, I'm not just sitting here waiting to be convinced, or anything. I actively think that it's all made up. I have an opposition.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, I have an opposition to it. It's amazing to me that we haven't grown up out of this yet. And so
Yes.
I see real problems with it, and I think it does, not always. It can do real harm.
It
Um,
can.
so I told you I've been married 25 years.
Right.
That was not my first marriage.
Oh.
It was my second. My first was a few years before that. It didn't last long, about a year and a half or so.
Oh no.
Yeah, but the reason why that first one happened was because of religious pressure.
I bet.
Um, I was living with my girlfriend at the time. Yeah,
How how I'm honestly shocked you had a relationship with God after that, you heathen.
right, right. Living in sin. And so I was doing that, and I went to see my folks for some reason, and
For some reason.
I feel like I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, did I need some? I was 20, 21. Like, did I need something? Like, I need help with some rent, or I forget. Anyway, I was over visiting with my parents,
Right.
and started getting the whole, God knows that you're living in sin, and you know, and then when I would go to church occasionally, because I had gone to the same church my whole life, and so
Right.
a lot of the rest of the community, they watched me grow up, and so
Right.
I had these older ladies in the church that would kind of do the finger wagging thing, and you know, uh, you got to buy the cow. You can't just get the milk for free, Gary.
God,
You
I
know,
hate that. Oh my
I
God. That
I
phrase
know.
makes me nuts.
I know. I'm like, why are you comparing her to a cow, first of all?
Yeah, first of all, not a cow. Second of all,
Yeah,
that's none of your business. That is inappropriate.
yeah, yeah. But they had no problem, the finger waving and all that kind of stuff. And then um, so I'm a pretty thoughtful guy. And so when I thought, man, the creator of the universe, the one that's in control of all this, is pissed at me for and so I actually went back to our apartment that night um, to break up with my girlfriend. Yeah, and say, hey,
Oh.
we of course she's brokenhearted. I mean,
Right. Right.
crying. I mean, what's going on? And I'm like, look, the thing is, we can't continue to do this. We can't live this way. So we either gotta end it or get married. And she's like, well, then why did you choose end it? And I'm like, you
I
would
mean, that is a good question. I mean, that
you
is a good question.
I'm like, you would marry me? And she's like, yes, I'd marry you. I'm like, well, I guess we're getting married then. Yeah.
You're like, well,
And
that's another red flag, ma'am. So
yeah,
if you're willing to marry me, that's another big old red flag for me.
yeah. So anyway, through all this pressure and all that, next thing you know, I'm planning a wedding, and we
How long
did.
had you guys dated at that point?
I want to say about a year, maybe 6 months to a year,
Yeah.
something like that. We moved
Yeah.
in together fairly quickly,
Yeah.
within a few months of knowing each other. But yeah, so we'd been dating 6 months or a year, maybe, and then we're planning a wedding. So
Wow. That's a lot.
yeah, we hadn't really been through any seasons yet.
Right. Right.
I think it's important to go through some of those. How do they handle the loss of a family member? How do they
Right.
handle holidays? How do
Right.
they, you got to get to know somebody first,
The
when
holidays, man, that can tank a relationship if you're not careful.
right. I mean, but yeah, we didn't do any of that. So we began to experience all these things as married, and yeah, so it didn't last at
Yeah.
all. And so finally I had to end that, and did. But I felt very pressured, and I feel like other people can be pressured into situations like that,
Yes. All the
be it
time.
be it getting
All the time.
married, where they
Mm-hmm.
choose to go to school, what they
Mm-hmm.
choose to do with their lives, whether or not they choose to
Yep.
chase their dreams and passions, and do things.
Yep.
it you know these things can have a tremendous effect on people's lives, and
Totally.
and a lot of those can be emotionally traumatizing
Yes.
and damaging.
Yes.
So there's times when it's fine, and I'm getting softer the more I go through my deconstruction, and the more I go through
Totally.
different phases of it. I heard you speak about this one time, and
Yes.
I really it struck me. Um, but I do believe there's real harm that can be done. At the same time, I understand that it gives some people a sense of community, and there's a network of friends around. And when you leave all that, you don't have that. So you almost have to intentionally go build that in
Right.
other areas,
Right.
be it hobbies or secular groups or
Well, and like the main difference, because I've heard that too. People say, well, it's a social group. It's just like any other social group. And I'm like, yeah, but when I told my mom I wanted to quit piano, the response was not, is that how you're going to live your life? Do you know how upset your grandma's going to be that
right,
you've turned your back on piano? Do you understand what this is going to do to the family? Are you saying that you have nothing in common with this family anymore? It's not the same, right? It's
right,
not the same at all. It's not just a social group. It's an identity. It is a group, but the extradition from that group once you no longer identify with them is a lot different. I still hang out with people I was on the debate team with, even though none of us are on debate anymore. I
right.
am not hanging out with anyone I ever went to any church with or was involved in any religious activity with ever.
Yeah,
Like, it
yeah.
doesn't happen.
It doesn't, and I feel like there's a part of me that's sad about that.
Totally.
Because it
Totally.
is a sense of community, and a lot of times it's good people, and I don't
Yeah.
mind I don't mind the challenge of exploring these ideas.
Absolutely.
So that's the reason why I don't. I love spending time with my sister, even though we have
Yeah.
opposing views. I love that. I'm starting a podcast with a believer,
Mhm.
and uh, I'm really enjoying spending time with him.
Yeah.
Um, you and I have a mutual friend, Pedro, and so me and Pedro get together very regularly
Yeah.
and spend hours and hours, spend the whole afternoon together, specifically going through these types of things, and I love it. It's a
Right.
shame. It's a shame that that there is such a separation.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I remember from when I was growing up. I mean, everybody else was the others. If
Yes.
my mom saw me get off the school bus and the guy that got off the school bus with me and was walking down the street with me had on, say, a leather jacket, oh, he's got to be one of those heavy metal guys. You're not going to hang
Yes.
out with him, because you might
Right.
hear some Ozzy Osbourne or some Iron Maiden or something, and so you can't hang out with that guy. And I
It
mean,
only takes once.
I
It only
know.
takes once.
Oh yeah, but any kind of difference like that, we don't associate with them, and
Right.
so it becomes a closed group,
Right.
and that I don't like that, and
Right. Well, not only that, but I think it can be toxic even for the people who are happy in it. And what I mean is, whenever I first tell people about like the angry atheist phase, right? I tell them, In order to become an atheist, you really just have to go through that angry phase. You're angry at yourself and the time you wasted. You're angry that you feel like you were vulnerable and tricked. You're angry at everybody who told you stuff. You're angry at people who invented the stuff. You're angry at everybody. But
yeah,
once you go through that phase and you start to recognize, like, okay, it was not the Truman Show. Everybody was not sitting back being like, "We're gonna keep Gary in this, we're gonna lie to Gary his whole life." It's
yeah,
they are also being told the exact same thing that you were. They think they're doing the best for you by getting you involved. Um, but when people are still in it, and I might argue it's worse when they're still enjoying it and when they're still in love with it and when they're still heavily involved with it, that's when I think it's its most toxic because they genuinely believe everything it is that they're doing and they're saying and they're feeling, and they genuinely believe that the right thing to do is to cut off their relationship with you and people like you because they truly think that surrounding themselves with people like us will stray their walk from God. And my thought process is, if you really believed, nobody would be able to take your walk with God away from you by
right,
saying that hanging out with people like atheists and agnostic people and punk metal people, um, by saying that that can harm your walk with the Lord, what you're saying is you might hear something that makes a lot of sense and doesn't align with everything you've been told, and you would rather go, la, 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 I can't hear you, than hear what the opposition is saying. Decide how you feel about that. What's your response to that? Prepare yourself for the real world where you're going to be hearing that all the time and come to your own conclusion. True belief is not never being exposed to other thoughts and feelings and opinions. True belief is being exposed to everything. And then at the end of the day, being like, but you know what? I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic. I'm whatever. I'm a member of Islam. Like that's who I am through and through. I've heard it, I've seen it, I've watched it, I've listened to it, I've befriended it. And at the end of the day, that's who I am. But
right,
I think maybe deep down, people know that if they hear stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, that's going to open a Pandora's box. And they would rather just get rid of the person who has the key to that box than peek inside and maybe prepare themselves for what they might hear or see.
yeah. I mean, I remember feeling like I was doing something wrong by
Yep.
reading anything that contradicted
Yeah.
um, our worldview at that
Yep.
time.
Yeah.
I really felt like I was reading something I shouldn't, or I just
It
questioned
makes
the
you feel like
source.
porn or
Or
something.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, this is just a science book that tells you the Earth is 13 billion years old, and so,
Yeah. Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Well, and something else that's wild to me is, as somebody who is a devout Christian, the way that we can look down on other Christians and not turn the mirror around. For example, I remember when I was in 6th grade, there was a kid who wasn't allowed to do the science project because it implied that dinosaurs were millions of years old. And my teacher was like, Billy doesn't have to do the project. He's doing his own project. And I remember thinking, like, that's crazy. Who doesn't know dinosaurs are a million years old? Like, duh, God invented dinosaurs a million years ago. And not being able to say, why don't I need evidence for anything else? Like, why don't
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
weird.
Well,
It's
and
interesting.
not only that, you spoke. Sometimes it's just the way that they talk about the church up the street.
Literally.
Oh,
Yeah.
those guys and the way they're doing things. You don't want to be part of. And every other church except for ours is doing it wrong, and
Yes,
it's like,
yes, yes.
you know,
Yeah, I told Vince, you're almost better off being an atheist than being the wrong kind of evangelical Christian. You're
right?
almost more salvageable not believing in God at all than being a Presbyterian
Yeah,
or a Methodist. I've
yeah,
never learned so much about how Baptists aren't real Christians until I started this podcast. And people are like, "Oh, you grew up Baptist? I thought you said you were Christian." And I'm like, "Whoa,
yeah,
whoa, excuse me.
yeah.
Who are you?"
Yeah, Baptists are different. So there was a joke back in the day that guy dies and goes to heaven, and he's walking around heaven, and there's this long hallway, and there's all these different doors. And so they walk past this one door, and there's these guys in there, and they've got on these robes, and this one guy's walking down the middle of the aisle. And he's got this smoke coming out of the thing. The guy's like, "Who are those people?" He goes, "Oh, those are our Catholic brothers." "Oh, okay." They go down the hallway a little more, and there's another doorway, and he opens this door. They look in that doorway, and everybody's got dressed in black, and some of them will have long hair and beards and this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, who are those people? "Oh, those are our Jewish brothers and sisters." "Oh, okay, great." He goes down another one, and he looks in there, and he sees a choir, and people have the choir robes on and that kind of stuff. And he says, "Who are those people in there?" And uh, I guess the saint, one of the saints, looks at him and says, "Shh, that's our Baptist brothers and sisters. Come on." And he goes, "Why are we whispering?" He says, "They think they're the only ones here."
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I think they're
Yeah,
the only ones.
yeah,
That's hilarious.
I think they're the only ones in here. So
That's good. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. I remember, like, I remember being able to look at, say, for example, Pentecostals and being like, they think when they go to heaven, they wash the feet of Jesus with their hair. Ew. And you're
right.
like, uh, your thoughts and opinions are also crazy. It just doesn't involve growing your hair out long. Like, tell me more about the things that you believe. Like, let's, because especially so when you ask a Christian, you're like, what about Zeus and Hercules? Do you believe in them? And they're like, of course not. And you're like, well, why not? And they're like, because that's ridiculous. And you're like, why is it ridiculous? And I'm like, that it's nonsense. Like, read it. It's nonsense. It never happened. And I'm like, an angry god in the sky with a son he sent to Earth is crazy nonsense and never happened. So we agree,
Yeah.
right? But no, but it's different. But it's different. And I
Right.
don't mean this insultingly at all. I have lots of Christian listeners and people who like even pastors who listen to this, and they've told me they share this with their congregation. You gotta know it sounds crazy.
Right.
At least have an argument. I'm preparing you to argue with people like us. Like, you gotta know, you gotta have an answer for why your version of that same story makes sense, and the much older version that's been around a lot closer to the beginning of time than you have doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, one of the things I learned going through this whole uh, deconstruction was I found myself studying the Bible more and more as I heard different things. See,
Mhm,
that's the thing. When you're like we were going to church 3 times a week, every time the doors were open,
mhm.
but there's not that much study that really took place. The same sermons got
Right,
preached over and over and
right,
over. I mean, it wasn't unusual for me to be like, yeah, so what he's getting ready to say after this is this, and then they'd get to that
right.
point in the sermon. I'm like, yes, there you go.
Yep.
Well, we heard the same
Amen.
sermons a lot over and over, and we didn't really get into the challenging aspects of them. And so,
Right.
when I first started hearing that the Bible never condemned slavery, I thought, surely somewhere, and so you go on a hunt for it. And so next thing you know, you spend 2 days in this whole slavery, rabbit hole, until you know more about it. Or the Midianites, going there and kill everybody, but keep the virgins. You don't really
What are you gonna do with those? Lead them to
yeah,
the Lord?
right. So you don't really study a lot of that. And so
Right.
a lot of times atheists know their Bible better than the believers, because for a lot of the
Yes.
believers, it's a lot of a community feeling. We go
Yes.
there, we sing some songs,
Yeah.
we talk about who's on the prayer list, we schedule weddings and funerals and this kind of stuff, but we don't really ask each other challenging questions.
Right.
And how do you know this? And does this actually make sense? Was
Right.
the Genesis account, was that order of creation, do we think that's the correct order? Or, is there other
Yes.
information that, I remember being told as a kid that the church was under attack, right? And it was a key phrase that they always,
War on Christmas.
yeah,
I
church
feel
is
sad
under
saying so.
attack. I remember hearing that when I was growing up. And in my young mind, what I thought it meant was that when you leave this place and you leave the tribe here and you go out into the world, you might hear somebody say some cuss words. You might hear some music that you shouldn't be listening to. You might see some movies that you shouldn't see. You might see behavior from people and that they're living in sin. It was that kind of, I thought that when they said the church was under attack, that they were just talking about not everybody had the same lifestyle as we did, right?
Right.
I did not know that at this time that there were debates taking place, that there were active challenges being posed. Um,
Scientific studies being held.
yes, yes, I didn't know those things, and they're certainly not going to say the church is under attack. And by the way, this weekend down at Vanderbilt is where you can go see the attack. Or you can get a recording of it. They're having a debate at Oxford, or they're having you know they didn't tell you the locations of any of these attacks because they didn't want you to hear that information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they did want you to be separate from the outside world and just maintain living like our tribe has
Right.
declared as the right way to live. So they did want you to say like that. But yeah, as I started going through this deconstruction and as I started stumbling upon a lot of these debates and a lot of these, things that were taking place, that's when I discovered that's what they meant about the church was under attack. But they
Yes.
never told me when and where, you
Right.
know. And so there was,
Right.
but yeah, it was under attack back then.
And
I
in
mean,
any other instance, if something is under attack, you're told when, you're told where, and you're told how to defend yourself. You
oh
might
yeah,
even be encouraged to go and defend others, right? But for some reason, this type of attack, you just plug your ears and stay far away from and just hide in your Bible or the church or your faith.
yeah, yeah,
Very
yeah.
interesting.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's been an experience going through all this, and I'm still in
Yeah.
those phases that you talked about. I don't think I'm quite in the. I don't think I'm as angry as I was at one point.
Right.
I'm a little bit beyond that. I'm more looking for. Um, have you told people about the group that we're a part of in Nashville and
Yeah. Yep.
the
Yep.
Conversation Coalition and all that?
Yep. Yep.
So one of our team leaders sent out that video a few weeks ago. It was a sit down with Brett Weinstein and Dave Rubin. I went back and watched that, and I watched not only that segment. I went back and watched the whole thing.
Mm.
And Weinstein said something in there. He said, if we can get to a point where we're viewing these things as important but not literal, then
Right.
maybe we can have a good conversation.
Yes.
And that kind of stuck with me because I can get value out of a lot of different works of literature.
Yes.
Um, I mean, even something as simple as say Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
A guy has such love for his girl that if he can't be with her, he'd rather not be alive, and so he'd rather not even
Yes.
continue living. And so I could take that and say that's an example of a selfless love
Yes.
for another human being. Okay, great. I can take that. I'm sure in a lot of Dostoevsky, I hear a lot of people mention Dostoevsky a lot, and so I'm getting ready to get a lot of his books and dive into that. But he speaks a
Aesop's
lot
fables.
Aesop's fables, And so I wouldn't have a problem looking at the Bible and saying, okay, I can find some good things in there.
Right.
Not all of them, but
Right.
I could pick through there and I could find some good things.
Yes.
Fine. If I
Yes.
if and I'm willing to, I am willing to get to the point where I could say there are things in there that are important but not literal.
Right. Right.
But
Yes.
that's a big line in the sand for a lot of, they're not, most believers are not going to meet you there.
That's like, I have always thought that the Bible was originally written as a book of fables to teach us lessons. I have
Right.
no problem with that.
I don't
Jonah
either.
and the whale, that's a fable in my opinion. Adam and Eve, I get what the message is. Honor thy father, do what you're supposed to do, or you get punished, right? Or beware of, snakes that'll lead you astray. I get it. Okay. Like there are lessons throughout the Bible that if you look at it from like an Aesop's fables perspective, you're like, I get that message. But when somebody looks me in the face and is like, no, literally all human beings came from the same two people.
Right.
Literally, the piece of bread was split 40,000 times and the one fish was split 40,000 times. That is a literal that I'm like, guys, I was agreeing with you for a minute. It's a great message. I get it.
Or the whole young earth, everybody on earth really came from Noah and earlier Adam and Eve. But then at some point, a lot of people got killed and none of those people passed on their genes. And it was just Noah and his family. And everybody came from there, and all the animals and all the diversity of
Right.
plant life, animal life, human beings,
Yes.
cultures, everything was bottlenecked into that one time frame right there.
And also, if it was, that proves evolution is the correct theory. Because if you've got two of every animal on that ark, guess what? They've evolved since then to
Right.
become what they are today. So it's just like, it's stuff like that where I'm like, in order to get out of the angry atheist phase, one, you have to understand the people around you are doing truly what they think is best.
Yeah.
They, like, your parents did not take you to church to harm you. They took you to church because they believe and they were told that the creator of the universe wants them to do that for their child. And that is the way to make sure you go to heaven, not hell. It's like, okay, I get it. I'm not mad at those people anymore. They literally were just doing what they were told. They were also told that smoking was good for you, right? Like, we get misinformation all the time.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore, right?
Right.
And then you think, okay, even the people in leadership at that church were doing the best they can. I don't believe that if I walk down to the church at the end of the block, that pastor is an evil guy who's not actually a Christian. He's just puppeteering everybody. He has dedicated his life to making sure that he tells people what he thinks God wants them to do and to say. Now, whether or not he convinces people to tithe a little bit more through shady practices, that's none of my business, right? but I honestly believe up until a certain point, people are just doing what they're told out of fear of burning in hell forever, and that's scary.
Yeah.
Revelations is scary, hell is scary, eternal damnation is scary. So of course, when you say, I don't think I believe in God, everyone who loves you freaks out. Because
Right.
they picture you writhing in a pit in hell when they were here to help you, and for whatever reason they failed, and they take it personally.
I mean, I would like to think that was I can't say that fear is one that I've seen or that I know that they should. If they really
Right.
believe, then you ought to be really concerned for my soul, and you ought to be, if you're a believer and you know for a fact that I'm an atheist, right? You ought to be concerned for my soul, and you ought to be doing everything.
But
what if I died tomorrow and you hadn't shared the gospel with me? Wouldn't you feel some kind of a...
Well, they did share the gospel, but you rejected it. But also, there's the other angle that not everybody experiences, and that's being Southern. And that's a whole, what are the neighbors going to say? What's your auntie going to say? What's your grandma? What's the man down at the hardware store going to say? He's known you since you were 5. Do you want to break his heart? You've got the religious, oh my gosh, you're going to burn in hell. and the I'm gonna be really embarrassed at Walmart mixed together, in
Yeah.
one pot. But again, if they told you about Jesus and you rejected him, that's
Yeah.
not on them anymore, Gary. That's on you.
Right. Right. And then when they finally come to terms with it, it's just a, well, bless your heart. You
Bless his
know,
heart.
bless his
Bless
heart.
bless his heart. We just did
Yeah.
our damnedest, I tell you. But
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you do you feel like you're still on this journey? Like, do you feel like you still learn new things all the time, or that your opinion will ever change, or that you'll ever be maybe more agnostic leaning, or will you just become more set in your atheist ways, do you think? What do you think?
Yeah. I don't foresee any agnosticism or certainly no belief. I don't see me shying away
Right.
um, from atheism at all. I may learn to be more gentle
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
more, um, the my first sit down with our conversation group was with Tim, and I had some I had some fire in my belly. I had some steam to blow, and thankfully he was very gracious
Oh, yeah.
and
Such a nice guy.
yeah, beautiful personality and
Mhm.
strong in his faith, but also totally comfortable with different challenges and that kind of
Right.
stuff. And he was very gracious and let me blow a lot of steam,
Mhm.
and that was very kind of him. And I've thanked him since then. But
Yeah.
I think I'm coming off of that a little bit,
Yeah.
and I'm looking more for a little bit of connection these days
Right.
um, with with believers and also non. I'm still so fascinated by the whole concept. And I was headed out to a job the other day, and it wasn't a long drive. It was like a 15-minute drive. And I think I passed probably 18 churches on the way. There was a couple of intersections that I got to, and there was a different church on each corner of the
Each
intersection.
corner.
There'd be a
Yes.
large Presbyterian, a large Methodist, a large Catholic church, and a large,
Those aren't real churches, Gary. Those aren't real churches. That's why they need more, because those aren't real.
Right. I said something to the guy working with me. I pulled up at the intersection. I'm like, look at all this land right here and all of these large buildings. And so I'm just fascinated by the whole industry. And I really feel like it's an industry
It is.
nowadays. When you see the buildings and the books and the money that comes in, I mean,
Yes.
I'm I'm somewhat charismatic, and I could easily, if I chose to, hey, you know what? We're going in the church business. And
You
that
you're
is
gonna start your own cult, Gary? Is that what you're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
do?
Look, if this whole granite thing doesn't work out, option number 2.
That's hilarious. But I
Uh,
mean, really though,
it does seem like an industry to
it
me,
is. It is.
to a large degree. And I know that
Yes.
that's probably mainly only with the leadership. Obviously, the congregations don't feel like they're feeding an industry. They don't feel that way. But
Right.
that's the whole thing. It's like going to a magic show or like going to except you're going there multiple times a week sometimes, and you're paying money, regularly
Right.
to do it, so
Right.
I
Right. The
can't.
problem is not with God. The problem is with the multi-level marketing scheme that is religion, right?
Right.
Never had a
Well,
problem with God. Big problem with religion.
yeah, I mean, and you hear that a lot of times these days. People will say, "Well, it's not religion; it's a relationship." So they try to get, they really try to steer away from the whole I'm Presbyterian or Methodist or, and then a lot of times they won't even go so far as to say I'm non-denominational. They just say I'm just a Christ follower.
Yes.
I just follow
Yes.
Jesus. And, you know,
Yes. Absolutely.
um,
I talk to
so
so many more people these days who don't want to associate with any religion. They say, "I believe there's a God and I believe in Jesus's teaching, but I don't consider myself a Christian or a Baptist or a Methodist or a Catholic because
okay,
of the religious undertones."
yeah, but they wouldn't even go so far as just Christian.
Nope. They're just
Okay.
like, they all say, like, I don't want to put a label on it. Like, there's no label. I believe there's a God. Or some people say, I'm spiritual. I believe that there's a higher being. I believe in the teachings of Jesus, which the teachings of Jesus actually aren't bad. The red letters in the Bible, they're really not bad. He was anti selling stuff in the church. He didn't want a merch table in that church, right? And
Yeah.
so they say, I take all the teachings of Jesus. I hear this all the time, especially with like millennials and Gen Z. They say, I follow the teachings of Jesus. Call that what you will, but I do not identify with Christianity, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody were listening to this
Mhm.
and maybe they hear themselves in your story, maybe they're married to somebody they met at church, but they're the ones feeling less and less devoted to God, or maybe they've kind of come out to their spouse and they've said, I don't know that I believe in this, or their family, or they're considering starting those things and they're afraid. What advice would you give them as somebody who's steps ahead of them in that process?
First of all, be open and honest with people, and yourself. Don't mislead anybody.
Yes.
Don't go along to get along. Um, you have to express yourself, and you have to be
Yep.
honest about where you're at, and um, because it doesn't make anything better for anybody long term
Right.
if you're not just an open book.
Right.
Um, so that would be my first thing is just honesty, and be honest with those people around you if you're going through
Yeah.
this. Look for information, try to explore, and find out what you can about different topics.
Right.
So education and honesty, I think those two will get you a long way.
Absolutely.
um, and you're
Absolutely.
and you're not going to feel bad about it later on,
Right.
if you're just learning things and being honest about who you are and where you're at.
Yeah.
So
100%. I feel like
yeah.
educating yourself on why you believe what you believe is so important. Even
Yeah.
if you're convinced that you're still a Christian, if you can answer why or how, or other than just parroting something somebody told you, if you can truly tell us why you think, you feel, you've read, that alone is such a big first step. So I couldn't agree more. Researching and reading and learning is so important, especially if you have questions, because those questions will go nowhere. They will
Yeah.
stick around.
And
And
as
then,
as far as you're able to, be compassionate and empathize with the people on the other side of that, because as
yeah,
you start exploring these things, it's probably going to be a little bit of a shock to those around
yes,
you. You may
yep,
or may not get good reactions. Hopefully, they get good reactions, and people just love them
yeah,
wherever they're at. But be prepared, because that's not always the case.
right,
Um, but you're not responsible for everybody else. You're responsible for you,
yep.
and so you just need to be the best you that you can be, and educate. Get education, be honest about where you're at, and treat people well. So
Yeah, that's such a great point. You are not responsible for other people, and you're definitely not responsible for their feelings either. That's
right,
yeah. Well, Gary, this has just been an excellent conversation. I really enjoyed hearing your story and getting to know you and just getting your perspective on stuff. I've always wanted to just kind of deep dive with you and just, learn a little bit more about who you are. And for anybody listening, in the notes, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on an audio platform, you can find information on Conversation Coalition. You can see some of our past conversations. I'll link some of our other videos and our YouTube channel in the notes so you can check those out. But if you have any questions for Gary or comments or thoughts, feel free to write an email. You can find the email there in the notes, or if you're on YouTube, you can leave them in the comments, and I'll make sure he gets all of them. And maybe we can do a part two if you got a lot of questions. Maybe there's a part two, a Q&A part.
all
Um,
right,
but Gary, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you spending your evening with me, just chit chatting about atheism and God and fossils and